Okay, here's the second recording in the first half of the linguistics lecture. Let me get the slides back up here again. Get it on the right section. Okay. Structural linguistics. This is basically a set of tools that are used to take apart a language and understand how it functions. All right. Think about Boaz again. He was doing that salvage ethnography, which we just talked about in the last section a little bit, and he was encountering languages that had not been documented at all necessarily. All right. So toward that end, you needed a set of tools for taking apart this unknown language and breaking it into meaningful sections and meaningful bits that can then be used to understand how the language functions. All right, so the basic four subfields within structural linguistics, which is again from a descriptive approach: phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. This is an overview slide. I'm going to talk about each one of these individually. Phonology, just to get the basic idea to start off with. Phonology refers to the study of sounds in general, and we'll clarify that later. Morphology has to do with word formation, and syntax has to do with the rules for sentence formation. Semantics has to do with meaning and interpretation in language. Meaning and interpretation. All right, so we'll move on to phonology. I want to distinguish quickly between phonetics and phonology. Those are terms that you'll run into if you're studying this beyond this class. Phonetics is the objective study of the sounds used in human natural language. So they look at all the sounds used in all the languages in the world as sounds. Right. This can be distinguished from acoustics, which is in physics. That's the study of sound. So that's an objective study of sound as well. This is specifically an objective study of the sounds used in human natural languages. Phonetics. If you look closely at the word, you'll see that there's an etic at the end. And this is the source of the word etic. Etic, etic. And we talked about that earlier in the course during the methods section. Remember emic and etic. Etic was the outsider's point of view, the objective point of view. You're looking at something as an outsider. And it makes sense. This is where it came from, right? Because you're looking at sound as an outsider objectively. What defines this sound? And a lot of times what they default to is how you physically produce the sound in your mouth. Over here we've got basically a table with symbols from the International Phonetic Alphabet. Also, it's abbreviated IPA. That's something you want to remember. International Phonetic Alphabet. You also want to understand the definition of an alphabet. A perfect alphabet has a set of symbols, and each symbol is equal to one sound. Right, that's an alphabet. Now, English has an alphabet. We've got a rendition of that below. We'll come back to that in a second. It's not a perfect alphabet, though. The IPA is a perfect alphabet. All right, every single symbol has one sound and one sound only. All right, so that's the International Phonetic Alphabet. That's used in linguistics all the time. They use it because they can write things out in such a way that you can read and pronounce them from the writing. If you tried to just use the English alphabet to do that, we use all kinds of letter combinations, make weird different sounds. There are sounds that aren't represented at all in the English alphabet, so it really wouldn't work. All right, so it's a means of phonetically spelling out sounds so that other people can just read it on a piece of paper and figure out how it's pronounced. All right, if you look at the table, it's a table of consonants. Those sounds are made with the tongue touching various parts of the mouth, as opposed to vowels that are made without the tongue touching other parts of the mouth. They've got different categories that have to do with the type of sound and the type where the other parts of the mouth are involved in it. Like bilabial means two lips. Labiodental means lips and teeth. Dental just means teeth, etc. You can go on to the rest of these as well. These are all different parts of the mouth. And these are the types of sound: plosive, nasal, trill, tap, or flap. I think I talked a little bit about trills just because it's something that's very concrete and easy for people to understand. It's like a rolled R. If you hear anybody speak Spanish, particularly, sometimes they roll out the R, like that. That's a trill. Closely related is a tap or a flap. and that's where you just do a part of the trill instead of rolling it out like you just like that. It's hard. It's easy. Probably comes across better in class, but basically there's just one tap of the trill. They don't draw it out entirely, but they distinguish between the two because they're different categories of sound according to this, right? You get the idea. What they're trying to do is define sounds based on how they're actually physically produced in the mouth. That's important. So if you're going to study phonetics or phonology, you'll spend a lot of time trying to sort out those sounds and how they're actually made and how some sounds are related to others and some are less related to others, based on how they're produced. All right. Phonology is a similar sounding word. Right, you just got an ology at the end instead of an edix. This refers to the study of sound patterns used in specific languages. All right, so somebody who studies phonetics is looking at how sounds are used broadly within human languages. They're looking at the sounds objectively. Phonologists, they're going to be more interested in the pattern of sound use in a specific language. Right. And I threw the English alphabet in there as an example of something that would be used in that context. They would have very little interest in the English alphabet if you were studying English sounds from a phonetics point of view. If you're studying from a phonological point of view, you would be interested in how people internally construct their written version of the language. So the other thing I talked about in here was the ampersand, which was more of a point of curiosity than anything. Right? That used to be attached to the English alphabet in the 19th century. And when students learned the language, the alphabet, they would sing it. And everybody's familiar with that from when you were a kid, I'm sure. W, X, Y, and Z is how we end it now. It used to be W, X, Y, Z, and per se, and per se, P-E-R, another word, S-E. That's a Latin phrase. It means by itself. So it would be X, Y, Z, and by itself, and. Right? And so this and sign is now called an ampersand because when the kids would sing the song, they would kind of trail off, X, Y, Z, ampersand. And eventually it just kind of got blended together into ampersand, and then they got dropped from the alphabet, and they kept the term. So ampersand is the technical term for that now, and it comes from just a corruption of kids singing the song badly. So that was one reason we were. Again, that's not a crucial point at all. It's just something I threw in, and the reason I wanted to talk about the alphabet a little bit more here was to point out that it's different from pure alphabet where you have one symbol that equals one sound. In English, we have all these spelling issues, and that's why we have to have spell check on the computers and all that stuff, and why we used to have spelling bees and things like that, because English spelling is totally irregular. Because we basically adapted the Latin alphabet to a whole other language. It's happened a bunch of different times. There have only been 5 different independent innovations of written language in the world, but there are hundreds of languages. And all of them have writing systems. So they've all borrowed writing systems from one of those original 5 inventions. And this was a derivation of cuneiform in the Middle East initially too. So it was actually the innovation was in the Middle East, and eventually it spread to other places and changed form and became what we recognize today. But the Latin alphabet was directly adapted to English in the distant past. And all those letters didn't necessarily conform to the sounds that we were using, so we started putting them together in weird combinations to fix things. We also pointed out that spelling wasn't regularized in the same way that we think of it today in the past. You go back to the 19th century, there are regional variations in how people tended to spell things. Individuals would spell things differently, and nobody would ever correct it. It's and now we got people paying attention to spelling a lot more. We've got a centralized education system. And so spelling is much more regularized. And not to mention that computers are programmed to understand certain kinds of spelling. And so they correct you all the time. You go back 150, 200 years, that wasn't the case. Right, so there's a lot of variability in how people use that alphabet in the past compared to today. All right. Okay, phonology. For each one of these, to the extent that we're able, we're going to talk about a unit of analysis. Remember, that's the thing, the sort of unit that people focus on when they're studying something, the unit of analysis. And the unit of analysis in phonology and in phonetics is something called a phoneme. Definition of a phoneme: it is the smallest unit of sound that makes a difference in meaning in a language. That's a phoneme. Smallest unit of sound that makes a difference in meaning in a language. And we're going to go through an example that hopefully will clarify that. Allophone is another term which refers to variation in the pronunciation of a phoneme. All right, so phoneme, smallest unit of sound that makes a difference in meaning in a language. Allophone is a variation in the pronunciation of that phoneme, meaning there are two, or maybe potentially more, but at least two different sounds that make the same difference in meaning in a language. All right, now if you look at the end of phoneme, it says E-M-E, like E-M-I-C. Yeah, the adjective form of that word would be phonemic. All right. Remember emic and etic? Etic, E-T-I-C, came from phonetics. Refers to the objective study of something. In that case, the objective study of sound. When we just say etic, we're talking about the objective study of culture. Emic comes from phoneme. Phoneme, smallest unit of sound that makes a difference in meaning in a language, that is subjective. Okay, if you look at it, a sound, from a phonetic point of view, you're just looking at how the sound is constructed. It doesn't matter about the meaning. If you're looking at it as a phoneme, the important part about it being a phoneme is that it makes a difference in meaning to native speakers of the language. All right, so that requires a subjective approach, subjective understanding, what that difference is. All right, so once again, allophone is a variation of the pronunciation of a phoneme. If there is more than one sound that can make the same difference in meaning in a language to a native speaker. Again, native speakers are always our source of data in linguistics. If we want to understand whether we've changed a word by changing a sound, we ask a native speaker. They should be able to tell us. We want to find out if there are variations of pronunciation of phoneme. We can test that with native speakers, and they'll tell us. We'll see an example in a second here. All right, the things we've got off to the left. Sometimes I introduce the International Phonetic Alphabet here. This is a chart for, we saw a table for consonant sounds on the previous slide, or this one before that, I don't know. In any case, this is a chart of vowel sounds, and this chart is meant to represent the inside of the mouth. Whoops, clicked when I shouldn't have clicked. All right, meant to represent the physical space inside the mouth, and the dots are the positioning of the tip of the tongue in relation to the other parts of the mouth. So you can classify the vowel sounds based on whether they're close end, open, and produced in the front part of the mouth, central, or the back part of the mouth. All right, so this is, notice there are a whole bunch of vowels here, and they're all written in the International Phonetic Alphabet. Some of the symbols may seem familiar, some may not. They don't necessarily mean what you think they mean. If you understood the terminology in terms of placement of the tongue, production of the sound, you might be able to reproduce them. But again, that takes some practice. All right. We may refer back to this later when we talk about sound shifts and historical linguistics. All right, so we'll probably see that chart again. Okay, now how do we identify phonemes in a language? As an example, it'll probably help you if you weren't entirely sure about the explanations of them initially. This should help clarify that a little bit. It'll also introduce to a test which can be used to identify phonemes in a language. Whether it's a language you know or a language that's totally unheard of to you, you can use this test to identify phonemes. All right. So once again, what you're going to do is you're going to need at least one native speaker, preferably more. And you're going to take a word and you just change one sound in the word. And then you ask the native speaker if the change that you made changed the meaning of the word. If it did, then you identified a phoneme. That sound that you changed was a phoneme in that language. All right. For the purpose of this example, I should probably change this example a little bit too. I got the right sounds, but the words aren't necessarily familiar to everybody, so bear with me where that's concerned. But we're going to test the sounds V and B. Note I didn't say V and B. Those are the names of the letters that represent those sounds in English. We just are talking about the sounds right now, V and B. All right, so I'm going to take a word, Veep, which a lot of students don't necessarily know what that means. It's an abbreviation for vice president. I think there's a TV show called that. In any case, it came to mind when I happened to write this down. All right, so there's a V at the beginning of that and an eep, Veep. All right, so what we're going to do is ask a native speaker what happens when we change the V to a B. So find a native speaker and say Veep, and then if they don't know what the word means, we can explain it, whatever. But then we say beep and ask them if we change the meaning of the word. And we did in this case. I'm a native speaker of English, I can tell you that. Veep is an abbreviation for vice president. Beep, however, is an onomatopoeic word. That's a word that is a word describing a sound which sounds like the sound it describes. Right, so beep, sound of a car horn makes. Right, so we changed that from a political office to a car horn sound. We can say that very definitively in English. V and b are separate phonemes. Change the meaning of the word. All right, if we do the same exercise in Spanish, and this varies depending on where the Spanish speakers are from. There are different ways of speaking Spanish in different parts of the world. We had some students in class. I can't remember where they're from. Dominican Republic, I think. And I don't remember all the different places and all the results, but I've had students from various parts of the world, and probably about 75% of them come out the same way. But some that other 25%, depending on whether they learn Spanish, that hear it differently. Right. So most of the time, 75% of the time, I'd say just shooting from the hip. Spanish speakers, when I go through the same exercise, take a word like cerveza, and I substitute out a b and a b, and not a b, a b instead of a v. Say cerveza instead of cerveza, they say it doesn't change the meaning of the word. Now, in which case, we've identified allophones, that is, they're objectively different sounds, which make the same change in meaning in a language of the same phoneme, allophones of the same phoneme. Right. So these two sounds are distinct phonemes in English, and in most of the time in Spanish, they are allophones. Right. There's one phoneme, but two different variations in the pronunciation, two different sounds. All right, hopefully that clarified some of the it's different hearing the definition and putting it into practice. Hopefully that helped to clarify it. All right, moving on. Morphology is the next subfield in structural linguistics. All right, this is just a conjugation of a verb in a Romance language, and I'm not being more specific than that because Romance languages are all derived from Latin, and they all have a similar core vocabulary. That's another term that we should get down. Core vocabulary refers to the terms that are least likely to change in a language over time. All right, so there are words that are used a lot, like love or like, mother, water, fire, stuff like that. That's a core vocabulary. And that's one of the things that is of particular interest to historical anthropologists, or historical linguists. They want to look at that core vocabulary, and by doing that, they can see which words are in common across a group of languages. And if that core vocabulary is very different in different languages, they're probably not that closely related. May not be related at all. But if you can see similarities in that core vocabulary, there's a good chance that they're related, and it's worthy of further study. In any case, core vocabulary. Amo is definitely part of the core vocabulary of Romance languages. So it could be, in Romance languages, I'm talking about Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Catalan, Romanian, things like that. So if you look at the core vocabulary in any of those languages I just mentioned, I think there are a couple more you could throw in there as well, but you'd find that they're all, to like or love somebody in all of them is going to be very simple, or very similar to this. So there'd be minor differences, say, between Spanish and Portuguese, and probably between Italian and Spanish as well, in the case of core vocabulary. French would be a little bit different. They had some different sound shifts, but you get the idea. All right. Morphology. Sorry. So I put this up here just to put us in the mind of constructing words. All right. Morphology is the study of the rules for word formation in a language. Right. Morphology, study of the rules for word formation in language. So we had phonology, which is about sound. Morphology is about how you put those sounds together in order to make words. The unit of analysis in morphology is a morpheme. And it starts off the same as a phoneme, but it's slightly different. So the smallest unit of sound, it just means the unit of sound. It's the smallest unit of sound that has a particular result. Smallest unit of sound that carries its own meaning in a language. All right, so phoneme, we said smallest unit of sound that changes meaning in the language. Morpheme, we're saying smallest unit of sound that carries its own meaning. That's a big distinction. Carries its own meaning. There are two different types of morpheme, the free morpheme and the bound morpheme. And free morphemes can stand on their own. They don't have to be attached to anything else in order to carry the meaning. So it's a collection of sound, or a unit of sound that carries a meaning I can just walk up and say that unit of sound and you know what I mean. That's a word, basically. Free morphemes are basically words. It doesn't matter how long the word is. It can be establishment, or it can be I, a personal pronoun I. Also, the eyeball I. Those are homonyms that sound the same and carry different meanings. In any case, it can be a long word or a short word. It's just that particular collection of sound carries a meaning and can stand on its own. It's a word. That's a free morpheme. Right. Now, bound morphemes. This term bound morpheme is synonymous with something called an affix. Right? That is something that carries a meaning, but it has to be attached to a free morpheme in order to carry the meaning. Right. I'll say that again. Bound morpheme carries a meaning, so it is a morpheme, but it has to be attached to a free morpheme in order to carry the meaning. Right? And I've got prefixes and suffixes. Affixes is a catch-all term. It includes prefixes, suffixes, and infixes. We'll get to that in a second. Prefixes and suffixes are common in English. We're very familiar with those from grade school on. And so just as an example, bound morpheme, if I say the word dog, that is a free morpheme. That is a word, free morpheme. If I say the word dog, you're thinking about a four-legged furry thing wandering around. If I say dogs, then you're thinking of multiple four-legged furry things. All right, what we've done is make the free morpheme dog, plural. But if I just say s, it doesn't mean anything. All right, so the s is an affix. It's a bound morpheme. It's a suffix because it comes at the end of the word. And if I just say that particular morpheme on its own, you don't know what I'm talking about. But if I attach it to a free morpheme, it changes the meaning of it and carries the meaning. All right. So these bound morphemes can be attached at the beginning of a word, in which case we call them a prefix. So they can be attached at the end of the word, in which case we can call them suffixes. Again, both of those things are common in English. Right. There's a third type of affix, however, called an infix, which is very infrequently used in English. Usually people can't think of an example at all. In some languages, it's as common as a prefix or a suffix. The infix goes in the middle of a free morpheme, in the middle of a word. Right. Now, there is one example, one construct of infix that we use in English, and we know how to do it. It's integrated into our language. We all know the rule for it, and it's used fairly infrequently these days, although regionally it may be used more. It's called expletive infixation. Now, years ago, after I knew what an infix was, and I got to college, but I wasn't doing what I'm doing now. I worked in a records department at a hospital, just for like 2 summers or something. And one of the things I had to do was file emergency room reports, which was super boring. I was just putting things in order and putting them in the right places. And I probably wasn't supposed to be reading them, but I read them once in a while, and just out of curiosity. And at one point I realized that they had a certain protocol that they had to follow. They had to ask certain questions in the ER about what happened to people, and then they had to write down the responses verbatim, which means exactly word for word what they said. All right, so in this one case, intake person was going through the list and asked the person how they got hurt, and they fell drunk off a porch or something and hurt their knee. And the intake person asked, where did it hurt? And the person responded, oh, where'd it go? Huh. That animation didn't work out too well. And it's probably because of the program I'm using to bring it over. In any case, we can't see the animation, but if we could, we'd see that it says every fucking where. All right. Expletive infixation is the practice of inserting a swear word into another word. In that case, infixation is the putting it in the middle of the word. So I said that we have a rule for this in English. If you went home and you tried to figure it out, you can figure out where to put the fucking in any word that you want. And that's evidence that if you're a native speaker, that's evidence that there's a rule for infixation in English. It's just that we use it in very specific circumstances. That'd be called an emphatic, right? Something that emphasizes something else. So it's an emphatic use of infixation in this case. An expletive is just a swear word. See, that animation just pops up and then disappears. I don't know. I'm using LibreOffice to play a PowerPoint, and occasionally things don't work properly when I do that. That's actually the first time that's happened, though, within memory, so that's unusual. Not your problem. All right, next category, syntax. Syntax is the study of the rules for sentence formation. So we've got phonology, studying sounds. We've got morphology, study the rules for word formation. Now we've got syntax, which is study the rules for putting those morphemes together in order to make sentences. We study the rules for sentence formation in a language. Unit of analysis in syntax is going to be a sentence, which stands to reason. So here we're moving to a tool. Just as we had the minimal pairs test for identifying phonemes, we're going to talk about frame substitution as a test for identifying different syntactic categories in a language. Right? Syntactic categories, we can loosely think of those as parts of speech because that's the way we probably encountered them. Right? For example, you take a sentence in frame substitution. This is a tool, again, for identifying syntactic categories in the language. Take a sentence, you take one word out, and you get your native speakers, and you ask your native speakers what words can fit in that blank. Or you can test out different words and see if it works. Right? In this case, things that, as a native speaker of English, I can say that you can put a word like climbed in the blank, or hate the tree, or I need the tree, or chop the tree, or whatever. Identifying syntactic categories, we already said that. So what syntactic category have we identified here? Verbs, transitory verbs. Specifically, we can narrow it down even further by changing the sentence and changing the word sets. Right? But if we didn't know that about English, we didn't understand the concept of a verb necessarily, because people don't have the same parts of speech in every single language in the world. They may have things that are analogous or similar, but they may be slightly different. Right? So this frame substitution technique will allow us to identify what categories they do have in a language and find those parts of speech and be able to catalog and understand them. Right? So that's a tool within syntax used to identify syntactic categories. All right, what we've got over here is worth mentioning as well. It's a diagrammed sentence. And that's something you do a lot when you study syntax. You diagram sentences. And all it is breaking the sentence, the structure of the sentence down, so that it's comparable across different languages, and you can compare structures within a language. Right, I'll give you just to briefly walk through the different tags here, so you understand what they are. S means sentence when you're diagramming sentence. I think there are two major ways of doing this. This is one that we used in when I took linguistics. I took some linguistics courses as an undergraduate. We used this. So the S stands for sentence. NP means noun phrase. All right, and within the noun phrase, we've got a determiner, in this case the, definite article, and a noun. Right, verb phrase, we've got a verb, and within that we've got it as an object, a noun phrase with a determiner and the noun. And so this is breaking down those different things and breaking them down hierarchically. You can see that some phrases fit within other phrases in terms of their structure. Right, so this is a lot of the sort of thing that people do when they study syntax. They'll break down sentences and look at the internal structure so they can compare them with other structures. Right, semantics is the study of meaning in language, and that's really as far as we're going to get with semantics. There wasn't an easy, readily available example as in the other categories that we talked about. All right, so the only thing I want us to remember about semantics is the definition: study of meaning in language. You may have heard somebody accuse somebody else of using a semantic argument or making a semantic argument. This means that they're trying to escape your argument by just arguing about the meanings of words. That's what that means. If somebody says you're making a semantic argument, it means you're not engaging my argument. You're just arguing about the meaning of words. Right? Semantics is the study of meaning in language. And this was, I lifted this from a linguistics textbook. You can see there's a diagram sentence in the middle, and then there are all kinds of crazy notations going on here. People trying to figure out. There's this whole process. You start off with somebody who's trying to communicate a thought. Somebody has to formulate a thought, and it gets translated into this syntactic structure, into language. And then somebody's interpreting it, on the other hand, has to parse those terms, sort them out according to the set of rules, assuming you speak the same language. And then there's interpretation that goes on beyond that as well. Right? Yeah, you can have misunderstandings with people who speak the same language as you. Certainly, that happens all the time. Right? So semantics tends they tend to get into fairly complex and abstract discussions about how that works. So it wasn't a simple like unit of analysis tool thing that we could do with this. In any case, what I want to, if I ask you about anything about semantics, it's going to be the definition, study of meaning in language. That's the end of that. So we'll break there, and that is the end of the first half of the linguistics lecture.